Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quake Match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Sulphur River in a little bit of Wood Elf against Skaven gameplay. And so for this build I decided to do a very Forest Spirit oriented composition, and I wanted to give a fair shake to one of the lords that you don't see all that often, the Ancient Tree Man. And I really wanted to try him out because normally I do run Durthu if I decide to run anything tree focused, but I wanted to try out the Tree Man, so we'll kind of see how he performs. Tree Man is obviously a Lore of Life spellcaster, unlike Durthu, who gets Lore of Beasts, and he's basically a downgraded Durthu across the board. He doesn't get the Sword of Death. Instead he does get the Power Stone, which does make him a somewhat better caster than Durthu is, and I do believe Lore of Life is generally better than Beasts. He still causes fear and terror, still has the same sort of survivability, but his melee defense and melee attack are a bit lower, I do believe. His melee attack is definitely significantly lower, and his weapon strength is not significantly lower, but it isn't armor piercing, so he definitely doesn't hit as hard. But nonetheless, he's still very tanky, very survivable, and very durable for a caster. And he still hits very hard against the majority of Skaven units, which are pretty squishy. So I did bring him here as my lord, and he's my essentially sole caster. Alongside him, I did bring two branch wraiths. Of course, these guys are a decent combat hero, and in this situation, they are solely serving the purpose of a combat hero, combat and support lord or hero. I didn't put any spells on them because obviously the Ancient Tree Man is bringing all the Lore of Life spells I could possibly want. And instead I'm just bringing Call of the Woods as well as the other Trickster's Shard. And as you can see, I'm spreading my army out as much as I can, so that way I can get the most out of the Trickster's Shards, I can get the most out of the leadership bonuses from the Branch Wraiths, and I can get the most out of Call of the Woods, which will improve all these Dryads' melee attack by +5, or at least some of the Dryads' melee attack by +5. Then, alongside that, I do have a unit of Treekin as well as a Tree Man, just to stiffen up my front line a little bit, provide hopefully some staying power if my opponent tries to rush through with Doom Wheels, for example, just something to time down. And then behind that, 2 units of Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts, just there to pick away at enemy armor targets, because this army comp is very, very low on armor piercing. And of course, Skaven do have a handful of units that do have armor. They have the Doom Wheel, they have their various Lord Mounts, they have the Screaming Bell and the Plague Furnace, and they have Storm Vermin. So there are a few options they could potentially bring that are very heavily armored. And while Dryads will absolutely shred through the lower end Skaven stuff, they will definitely struggle against those sorts of heavily armored troops. Finally, I did bring a Frost Dragon up in the air, and of course this is a great unit, causes fear, terror, does have a breath attack, armor piercing. It's a little lightly armored and definitely pretty low on HP for a dragon, but nonetheless pretty decent unit, and definitely hoping to get some use out of it. And of course it does cause poison damage, which is can definitely provide some nifty debuffs. For my opponent, he did do a very wide Skaven build. For his lord, brought Gracier of Ruin with a very large selection of spells. We do have Warp Lightning, we have Unholy Clamor, which is actually from the Screaming Bell. Of course, Scorch, which is a free cast from the Screaming Bell. And Crack's Call, which is a wind spell that is, I do believe, fairly similar in some ways to Scorch. It's but of course, wind spell. And he does, of course, have Arcane Conduit, so he can recharge his power reserves fairly quickly. Good old Wall of Unholy Sound, which is an AoE buff to nearby Skaven, and just a very, very powerful sort of unit. Alongside him, my opponent did bring 2 Plague Priests. These guys are well, one is completely lacking spells. The other one did bring a single spell, which I'm not entirely sure. Vermintide, so he can spawn some clan rats. And of course, these guys, when they are in melee, they do have an actually, this is just constant even when they're not in melee, but they do have a constant AoE of Mortis Engine effect, or Mist of the Lady effect, that slowly takes away hit points from all units near them over time. Of course, they have bonus against infantry, armor piercing. They're fairly well armored themselves, magic damage, contaminated, which causes leadership debuff, all that sort of stuff. So very, very potent, and can definitely be troublesome for me to deal with. For his front line, my opponent is packing a whole bunch of Skaven Slaves and Skaven Slave Spears on either flank, just to kind of beef the line up and make it a little wider, make it easier for my opponent to envelop me. Here in the center, though, is really kind of the damaging component of his army. 2 units of Plague Monks and 2 Plague Monk Censer Bearers. The Censer Bearers are a little bit of an interesting pick against Wood Elves, because obviously the armor piercing is a little redundant or not so useful, but against the tree heavy build that I've brought here, it could actually prove somewhat useful, because of course Dryads have been buffed with their armor, and Treekin and Treemen have fairly good armor. And the magic damage on these guys does bypass my physical resist. My opponent also does have 2 units of Rat Ogres backing up that front line as well, just there to provide a little more armor-piercing, anti-large oomph, and then finally a Doom Wheel. And of course the Doom Wheel can just rampage around and be a nuisance. Perhaps get into my back line and disrupt my archers, which would definitely be a bit of a problem. So you can see my Starfire Shafts are already firing on the Doom Wheel, getting a little bit of damage in, knocking off a couple 100 HP on it, and I'm trying to intercept it with the Tree Man, unfortunately my Dragon, I've flown him definitely right over my opponent's line. And now the Doom Wheel is kind of just barging through, bypassing the Dryads, trying to get past the Tree Man, and I'm not really able to shut him down with the Glade Guard. In the meantime, all of my Dryads have kind of charged in, and they're meeting the Monks and the Rat Ogres and all these units in just a straight-up fight, and getting torn through rather quickly, especially with all the damage. And of course, while the Plague Priests don't do a lot of damage necessarily per hit, they actually have a very, very wide AoE, so they're doing a lot of damage, and with all these spells just being a nuisance. Unfortunately, Dryads are fairly tanky, even against magic, just because of their 60 armor, which is fairly respectable. Makes them a little more survivable. In the meantime, I've been trying to burst down this Doomwheel, but it is definitely a struggle, and it's rampaging through my Glade Guard, tying down my Dragon, and just causing a disproportionate amount of problems. And of course it does cause terror, so it will eventually rat off these Glade Guard and just make them flee. Fortunately though, the Glade Guard is still peppering it down, doing some damage. Over here, my first unit of Dryads has broke. My army is definitely a bit scattered. My Tree Man is slugging it out with the enemy Plague Priest, with to help some Dryads. My opponent's forgotten about his center here, and over here on the flank, these Skaven slaves are getting tied down by a single unit of Dryads. Unfortunately though, these guys do have fairly high melee defense, and so they're going to tie down the Dryads for at least a little bit of time. Over here though, the Dryads have kind of buckled most of the enemy line. They're just tearing through. Treekin should help them push through the Plague Monks in spite of enemy spell support. Unfortunately, the left flank has buckled, and you can see the Dryads just routing off, but the Dragon has finally got itself on top of the Doomwheel, and the Archers will start being able to pepper it down and just bring it down, bring the Doomwheel to heal. Though of course they're doing a bit of friendly fire to the Dragon as well. Over here, the Branch Wraith and the Tree Man, as well as slowly will be feeding more Dryad and units in, are going to be tying down this area, just trying to tie down all these monstrous and troublesome units. Branch Wraiths don't have the best melee defense, so they actually will not perform that well against, say, Plague Monks, or definitely not against Plague Monks Sinister Bearers. Over here on this flank, the Dryads are getting shredded by the Plague Monks Sinister Bearers, who do a lot of damage to them, and of course they get their full charge off on the Dryads. Interestingly enough, Dryads don't have a very high melee charge bonus, they don't have a very high charge bonus. In the meantime, though, my poor opponent's Plague Monks are getting absolutely demolished because, of course, Dryads trade very, very efficiently with them. The Dryads over here, in the meantime, have not lost a single model and are slowly but surely chewing through all these Skaven slaves and kind of cleaning up this flank, though definitely not in a cost-efficient manner. The Doomwheel has been destroyed by a combination of the Dragon's efforts as well as the Glade Guard. See, it's right over here, destroyed there. And the Dragon is now jumping on the next large target, this Plague Priest over here, and just trying to bring it down. Now, it is hitting back at the Forest Dragon, but not really doing quite enough damage. Over here, the Tree Man is still tying things down, definitely wreaking havoc on these Plague Monks. And of course, Rat Ogres are not only susceptible to terror, but they also don't have the best of armor, so they're definitely very susceptible to Tree Man and the good old Dryads. You can see one of the Plague Monks does go down over here to focus fire from the Starfire Shafts, but unfortunately I only have 2 units of Starfire Shafts, and now they are trying to arc over the Tree Man, but they're definitely having a slightly hard time hitting this Gracier of Ruin back here. And of course, if they do friendly fire, they will do a lot of damage to the Tree Man because of course they bypass most of his armor, they bypass his physical resistance, and they cause fire damage, which is just basically a triple whammy of trouble for a Tree Man. Over here, though, my Ancient Tree Man is definitely holding his own, kind of tying down all these very angry Plague Monks, Sinister Bearers, the Rat Ogre, and still trying to slide out with the Plague Priest, all while supported by these awesome Treekin who are still holding their own. Of course, they're not able to do very much damage, but they are just kind of tying my opponent's troops down. The Dragon does get a nasty breath attack here and does a little bit of damage. Will now get a rear charge in and hopefully disrupt some of these troops. Over here, the Plague Monks and Skaven slaves are just trying to surround and beat down these Dryads, but as you can see, the Dryads have so far racked up 150 kills and are still sitting comfortably at 73 models and most of their HP. Finally, things are kind of degenerating over here. You can see the Archers are trying. I've moved my Archers up, trying to get them on this Plague Priest because I'm realizing that they were simply not able to hit this Gracier of Ruin very consistently. One of the big problems with trying to hit Screaming Bells is that they tend to jerk around a lot and kind of do some unnatural or strange kind of movements when they attack, and it makes it very difficult for units to hit them consistently. Over here, the Branch Wraith is definitely struggling against the Plague Monk Sensor Bearers, who are dishing out a lot of hurt to it. As you can see, the Tree Man is definitely hitting them pretty hard. These guys definitely don't have, they have only 10 armor and their physical resistance is irrelevant. All that magic damage is definitely paying off very, very well. It's one of those great things about Wood Elves, they have so much access to magic damage that Skaven are very, very weak against that because that's one of their only real survivability options on a lot of on their better infantry and their monks and their various gutter runners and death runners and that sort of stuff. Now over here, this Gracier of Ruin is trying to get close to the Tree Man, but then thinks better of it and decides to swing up top and try to go after the Forest Dragon and the Treekin and all these units that are fighting for their dear life here. You can see the poor Tree Man is getting wrecked, and these Dryads are definitely getting torn up. Now the Dryads fortunately do have an immunity psychology, so they are holding their own, where most of the units would have routed at this point simply due to their use of psychology. You can see these Dryads over here, despite being very tired, are still just doing immense amounts of work. Down to 53 models, but still almost 200 kills. Absolutely crazy. The Starfire Shafts are starting to run low on ammo. You can see this unit over here has run out, and I'm going to be committing. You can see they've actually gained 2 chevrons, which definitely demonstrates just how much damage they've been doing. And this unit has gained 1. They're now starting to focus on the Plague Monk Sensor Bearers, just trying to kind of break them up as we go into the end game. I'm casting a bit of an Earthblood here, trying to get a little bit of healing done, and we are just as we're starting to blob around our opponent's lords as the game ends. So, looking at the after the battle results, some of the Dryads performed really well, some of them did not perform well. One of the problems with the Dryads was obviously that some did get caught by those nasty Plague Priests, and some of them got caught out on the flank by Plague Monk Sensor Bears, that sort of stuff. Those are not really favorable matchups for the Dryads, and I honestly should have been more on top of sending the Dryads to fight units that really or go into matchups that favor them. For example, that matchup they had against the Skaven Slaves, or the matchups they had against Plague Monks, the Dryads performed very, very well. Those are some of their ideal matchups, and honestly, even against Plague Monk Sensor Bears, they can trade fairly effectively. But obviously, once they are thrown up against Rat Ogres, or if they're thrown up against, especially the Plague Priests and those sorts of units, they just do very, very poorly. Glade Guard did some absolutely immense champion work, doing a huge amount of damage, gaining 2 and 1 Chevron. Just bring down that Doom Wheel, then focusing out the Plague Priest, and helping focus out the Gracie of Ruin as well as the other Plague Priest. The Dragon, similar situation, managed to take down the Doom Wheel, help take down one of the Plague Priests, and then just constantly causing rear charges and that sort of terror rear charging disruption. The Tree Man, just an absolute champion at tanking. Treekin did an okay job of just holding. The Ancient Tree Man honestly is not bad. I don't think he's a bad choice in the Skaven matchup, because Creek is not, from what I've seen, a very popular choice. And unless you're really worried, and the thing is, Doom Wheels will usually not try to goon your Lord. They'll usually kind of run amok in your backline anyway. So if you're just trying to bring a tanky Lord, and not too worried about the mobility, the Tree Man is not really any worse than he's not really worse than Durthu against Skaven in the vast majority of fights. Obviously, Durthu would have done a lot better there against the Gracie of Ruin in a single matchup, but otherwise Durthu would not have done much better against the remaining units, because his armor piercing and frenzy and all that would have been fairly irrelevant. Furthermore, of course, I did get easy access to Lore of Life, and I wasn't forced to invest in spellcasters for the sake of spellcasting. Obviously, I did bring the branch race, but I brought them as a combat hero, just there to kind of tie the enemy down, and they performed that task very, very admirably. And I definitely liked the branch race just for that combat role. It was cool to bring two of them, basically just as a combat hero in this vein of an Empire Captain. For my opponent, I think some of these stats are a little bit misleading. It's important to keep in mind that my army was very, very small and very elite. So obviously his units didn't really have the opportunity to rack up that many kills. The Skaven Slaves are definitely a bit of a, I think, iffy pick against Wood Elves. Wood Elves have a lot of fear and terror causing units. Besides Undead, I think the Wood Elves are probably the best faction at causing fear and terror. Or definitely one of the best factions at causing fear and terror. And so bringing Skaven Slaves against them is very, very risky, I think. And they were routing fairly easily in a lot of cases. The Rat Ogres proved somewhat lackluster as well. They just weren't able to rake in the kills. 5 and 26 is not too impressive. And I think Sensor Bears are definitely a little bit of an interesting pick against Wood Elves. Just because they're very susceptible to shooting, and of course, my build in this situation was very, very light on shooting, but a lot of Wood Elf players will go much, much more heavily into, and will be much more heavily invested into their shooting contingent. And if that is the case, then Sensor Bears are really, really susceptible to damage. And similarly, I think it's a bit of a similar case with the Plague Priests on the Plague Furnaces. Now, on the other hand, my opponent did bring a lot of these troops, so there was definitely a lot of dilution of my, even had I brought a very shooting army, so that is something important to keep in mind, I suppose. But nonetheless, I do think it's a little bit of an iffy pick against Wood Elves. Finally, Doom Wheel didn't perform too well, and the Doom Wheel is, I think, it's a very popular unit. It's rather powerful. It's definitely one of the better chariot type units in the game, because it does cause fear, it does cause terror, it does have that awesome armor piercing, it does have those death laser shots that it fires all over the place and causes damage. It's definitely strong from that aspect. But in this sort of situation, it wasn't able to really get much in the way of terror outs. And it did get hunted down by the Forest Dragon pretty aggressively. And the Forest Dragon can, of course, poison the Doom Wheel, making it much more easy to shut down. Regardless, getting into my opponent, Afroman 001 in this situation. Definitely a very tight match. You can see the losses were very heavy on both sides. And yeah, I had a lot of fun. I thought it was a great game. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about to lore or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.